take a few minutes and give everybody sort of a grounding as to who MDIC is, what we do, and then I'll hand it over to Dan Matlis as we go through the advanced manufacturing. So a little bit of background, as Ben mentioned, we started back in 2012 as a public-private partnership with the sole responsibility of accelerating patient access to innovation. And there's the background stories as to why and how important that is. But we've been on that mission since the beginning. And the work that we do is through the strategic partnerships that we have with government, industries, and nonprofits. So from a government perspective, it's not just FDA, but it also includes other groups like CMS and NIH and NIST, for example. On the industry side, we represent or participate in our collaboration with device manufacturers, folks in digital health, as well as the diagnostics space. And then in the nonprofit area, we have patient advocacy groups, as well as payers and academia. So as you get and learn, as companies and folks learn a little bit more about MDIC, you'll see that a lot of these groups show up in the work that we do. The work that we generate, we've got over 70 resources in our resource library, and that cuts across all of our program areas that I'll talk about in a moment. We're a membership organization. We drive procedure and process efficiencies. We are not a policy group. We don't drive policy changes, but we do in many cases can influence decisions that lead to or influence guidance documents and things like that. But we are focused primarily on process. So we have about 75 participating members in our organization. That gives us, because of our vast and distribution of our stakeholders, we have over 900 subject matter experts that get involved in some fashion of our working groups, whether they're subject matter experts and keynote speakers or volunteers that are working in our programs. And through our programs, we have over 50 active working groups across a variety of areas. And the work that we do covers quality, design and manufacturing, patient engagement, as well as evidence generation and digital health. And so in the science and technology group, which is the one I represent, we have 10 program areas, and then there are 2 other program areas that MDIC has under health economics, patient value, and then the National Evaluation System for Health Technology, or NEST. But the work that the Science and Technology Group oversees falls into a variety of categories. Some of them you may be familiar with. In case for quality, computation, modeling, and simulation, we do work in cybersecurity. I mentioned the digital health and software as a medical device. Some early feasibility, which is one of our early program areas, and then the science of patient input, to name a few. As I mentioned, our mission and vision, we focus on innovation. So we're looking to lead innovation, improve health outcomes, support wellness for all people. And we break down the barriers. So I talked about that process piece. So we're breaking down those barriers that sometimes can be challenging. And today we're going to be talking about some of those challenges within the advanced manufacturing. And then the way we do it is through collaborative work. So all of our programs are through volunteer support. We are a highly collaborative group with our stakeholders and key partners, all sharing the same vision to develop technologies, to propel technologies, and to bring access and speed access. So advanced manufacturing, what we've called is the clearinghouse. So we've called it the Advanced Manufacturing Clearinghouse. And the reason we're referring to it as a clearinghouse is because that clearinghouse is the portal for which we're going to be sharing use cases. And the use cases are coming from projects that we help subsidize the funding through collaboration with the agency, with FDA. And we worked really hard with those guys to build a governance structure, to evaluate programs, and to decide what are the programs that we wanted to see come through the portal, and the willingness for those organizations to really share their stories. And we can tell you that what we're most interested in is how companies arrive at decisions to invest in advanced technologies. How are they overcoming some of the internal challenges, whether it's implementation, awareness, training, funding, return on investment conversations, all of those things. And what we experienced was there was a number of companies had come to us, but some of those companies stalled in their process. And so that triggered us to then say, well, maybe we need to do a much broader survey. And so what we did was, working with Dan Matlis and his organization, Axendia, we developed a survey. And Dan and his team were able to conduct that survey through the June-July timeframe. And what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about some of the findings in that survey. And then we've got some prepared questions for this panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan Matlis now and have him take us through the survey results and some of the findings as it relates to barriers, challenges, and implementation.
Thanks, Joe. Really appreciate it. Just a safe harbor statement, any content that we're going to be sharing today is based on our research, interactions with officials, industry executives, and our clients, and our current opinions. So as Joe mentioned, earlier this year, we got together to identify what are the internal and external barriers that the medical device industry has to overcome in order to accelerate the adoption of advanced manufacturing. So we embarked on a quantitative and qualitative research. So we had a survey, but we also talked to industry thought leaders around their experiences in this space. So just to level set, advanced manufacturing is a very broad area as it is defined. In the medical device sector, it refers to the use of novel technologies or innovative applications of existing technologies in order to enhance product quality and manufacturing processes. It's not just about adapting new tools, but also working on a journey to manufacturing maturity. And it really emphasizes continuous improvement and innovation in manufacturing practices. It's important to mention that FDA's definition of advanced manufacturing includes a wide variety of technologies that in industry are not typically thought as manufacturing technologies. Obviously, 3D printing, MES, ERP fall into that category, but we're also including ERP, QMS, cloud computing, modeling, simulation, and digital twins, amongst other technologies. So let's talk a little bit about the demographics associated with the report. As you can see, about half of respondents to our survey were from large organizations, 40% from small companies, and 11% from medium-sized organizations. As it relates to the level of responsibility, nearly 60% of the respondents were directors, VP, general managers, or C-level executives. So we really got input and feedback from those leaders within the organization, but also have good input from those doing the work in their functional areas. And as it relates to the functions, 27% were in the quality area, 13% in engineering, 13% in regulatory, and a wide variety of other respondents. So let's talk about what is the value of advanced manufacturing in the medical device industry. So when we asked, do you believe that advanced manufacturing holds the potential to revolutionize medical device manufacturing, the overwhelming majority, 85%, agreed with that statement. So we obviously see the value of implementing the technology, which is very positive. It's important to make sure that we agree that using this technology will help us. When we asked the perception of the potential impact of the adoption of advanced manufacturing on product development and lifecycle management processes, 95% of respondents told us that it is either somewhat or very positive. So again, we're seeing the value, we're seeing the opportunity. However, there are definitely challenges that we need to overcome. When we asked which functional areas in their respective organizations would benefit the most from advanced manufacturing, nearly 70% said manufacturing and operations, 61% highlighted quality, 54% product development, and then you can see a wide variety of other responses. But the top three are manufacturing operations, quality, and product development, which really align very well with the intent to bring products or higher quality products to market more quickly. When we ask about the impact of advanced manufacturing across a variety of areas, again, you can see overwhelming support. When we're talking about regulatory compliance, 60% of respondents thought that it would have a high or somewhat high impact. When we are asking about improving process efficiencies, nearly 90% of respondents told us that implementing advanced manufacturing and novel technologies will improve process efficiencies. Over 3/4 of respondents told us that implementing these technologies would improve product quality. 72% said that it would improve cost and improve operational efficiencies, and about half told us that they would improve safety and ergonomics. These are really important and impressive numbers. Again, it aligns with the fact that we recognize that we need to implement these technologies. But what are the challenges that we need to overcome? When we asked, what are the top barriers to implementing advanced manufacturing, 64% of respondents told us that it was financial justification, getting that ROI, being able to go to management and the finance team and say, if we implement this, this is the return we're going to get. The second one was regulatory challenges. So the perception that there are regulatory hurdles that we need to overcome, and I know we'll talk about this some more with Daniel a little bit further down the line. And then the third one was around technology maturity and scalability. Is the technology ready? Well, from my experience, having been in this industry for 34 years and having started my career implementing what we called advanced manufacturing, which included robotics and vision systems and computer integrated manufacturing 30-some years ago, the technology is mature. The technology today is ready. The issue is perception, and that's what we need to change. As it relates to the regulatory challenge, when we ask, do current regulatory frameworks support the adoption of advanced manufacturing initiatives? Nearly 60% have the perception that current frameworks do not support it. We have some discussion around that. However, when we look further into the three groups that were most highly represented, you see very different answers, which are very telling. Folks that are in the engineering function, 56% say that current frameworks do not align. In regulatory, it's a toss-up, it's 50-50. What's very telling is that people that self-identified as working in the quality role, 70% of those people don't believe that current regulatory frameworks support advanced manufacturing initiatives. And this is something that we really need to work hard to overcome because, again, having been in industry, you have an idea, you have a process, you have a technology that you want to implement, and then you will go and talk to your quality folks and ask, what do I need to do in order to implement it? And if there is a misalignment between what the technology can do and the amount of effort that we need to apply in order to bring the technology to life, that drives some of the challenges. We also had a question around what % of project budget is designated to create quality and regulatory documentation. So this might be anything from your requirement specification all the way through your IQ, OQ, PQ, all the documents in between, testing, unit, system integration, all, all of the documentation that we are so familiar with and in air quotes, know and love. What's interesting is for those individuals who believe that current regulatory frameworks support the adoption of advanced manufacturing, 29% are spending at least 50% of their project budget in documentation. But you can see an increase for those who do not believe that current regulatory frameworks support the adoption. That number goes up to 40%. So in those organizations, they're spending 40% of the budget, or at least 50% of the budget in documentation. And in some cases, as much as 75% or more. So how are companies implementing and modernizing processes? What are the types of technologies that they're putting forth? What we're seeing is 67% said that they're using or implementing quality management systems. 55% are leveraging product lifecycle management solutions. 48% are implementing automation technologies. And then you can see other technologies that are coming down the pike. So looking at all this information together, it's really important to holistically understand what are the challenges and how do we work together as an industry, collaborating with regulators and technology and service organizations in order to achieve the value that we all know we can gain from implementing these technologies.
Thanks, Dan. So we're going to go ahead and ask some of the questions based on what we've kind of extracted from the survey ourselves, and then open up to some of the Q&A. And I see there's already one question that I think we'll probably cover in the conversation, but if we don't, we certainly will address it. So I'm going to start, Dan, with you. You mentioned a lot of the areas in terms of barrier, whether it's cost, investment, or convincing others the value of the technology and making that transition because of some of the benefits, right? Whether it's reduced cost and gained efficiencies, it's improved quality. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the myth of it's something that organizations are reluctant to do because they don't want to give up, say, cost of goods or margin, or they don't want to run the risk of making a huge investment and not getting that return on investment. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. So let's start by level setting. We all agree that implementing these technologies, and we have the data to prove it, we've just shown it, will actually improve product quality, improve efficiencies, improve ultimately patient outcomes, which is our goal. We need to then understand what are the drivers. So in organizations, so what's the ROI? If I'm going to spend $1 million implementing a new technology, but then I also have to spend $1 million documenting that technology, my ROI just got double, right? Instead of 2 years, which is reasonable. In some companies, it may be 18 months. In some companies, it may be a little bit longer. But now, all of a sudden, I double the amount of time in which I can get that investment. And as a result, we don't implement the technology and we don't see the value. What we need to do is overcome that internal organizational inertia. Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We can have the best strategy in the world. We can have the best technology, we're going to roll it out. But if the culture is such that we are over investing or overspending in documentation, then we're never going to get there. And this ties into some of the initiatives that the agency is putting forth around computer software assurance, using a risk-based approach and having the appropriate amount of documentation based on the intended use of those particular features and functions, as opposed to the intended use for the entire system. Historically, if you went to quality and you did a risk assessment and there was one feature or function that was high risk, then the whole system needed to be validated as a high risk system. That defeats the purpose of risk-based approaches. So I think it's really important for all of us to bust that myth that technology is not going to improve efficiencies. It will. We have the data. We need to change our culture to make that happen.
Great, thanks. So Parker, from an industry perspective and also from leading a project in this area, can you talk a little bit about how you and your team had to face some of these challenges and how you overcame them, or maybe you haven't yet, but you're working towards it? So give us some of your industry perspective there as you're going through this in real time.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it's unfortunate that this myth exists, and I think it is like our duty to bust this myth to start off with that. I think my why for advanced manufacturing comes down to one factor, and that is the ability to learn. And I define ability over the rate of learning, the speed of learning over cost. And what I found that was almost every advanced manufacturing technology increases my ability to learn, which is awesome because I'm an engineer. So I have to answer questions for a job, right? And so definitely there's no shortage of the questions that I have, but I'm always at this crossroads of how do I best answer this question? And advanced technology just completely transforms and unlocks that. And I think that's really important when you're driving this change in organizations and when you're talking about the ROI, is that if you can bring it back to the ability to learn, then you have a really strong business case. The second part of this is the mindset. So digital transformation, it's not a project, it's not a technology roadmap, it's not a team, it is a mindset. And it's a mindset of curiosity and of challenging the status quo. And so this goes back to, hey, are organizations ready? Do they have the frameworks in place to start driving this? A lot of times, no, those frameworks have to be redesigned. And you have to be very strategic at the points in time of when those frameworks should be redesigned and test it out. And this is another reason I'm not a huge fan of pilots. I think pilots put a lot of stress and pressure on teams to meet timelines and to meet the budget of the pilot. And so what happens is teams end up losing their ability to learn and to be curious because they're so stressed out about hitting this kind of fake timeline and budget that we've created for a pilot. And so as leaders, we have to create this very safe space for teams to learn and to be curious and to fail. And if you can do that, you start to build this mindset. And then these technologies start to spark, right? And these catalytic reactions start from the bottom up the organization and start to drive the change. And those are the areas that I've seen have really helped. So it's the mindset, it's creating a safe place as leaders for people to be curious, to learn, to fail, and then focusing on the ability to learn. And I want to go back to the ability to learn because this is so important for our industry, in that we have to understand the inputs of our systems that impact performance, and we have to make sure that we put the right levels of control on those inputs. Now, you're always trying to not over-engineer these controls and not under-engineer these controls. So if you over-engineer controls, that's where you're at the risk of potentially throwing out good product, right? Which is yields, which is your COGS and all that fun stuff. And so the next part is, okay, how do we make sure that we're not under-engineering the controls? To be really, really good at that, you have to deeply understand variation. And advanced technology is really good at doing that. So the physical world constrains us in many ways from a cost of time perspective and understanding variation, but the digital world unlocks that constraint, specifically modeling and simulation. So this is an area that you see getting a lot of attention these days with virtual patients. That ecosystem is exploding with investments because that is an amazing ability for us to understand how does patient variation impact our systems and vice versa.
Great, thank you, Parker. So let's talk to the FDA. So Daniel, we've had an opportunity to talk about this a few times, but give us your thoughts in terms of that perception that regulatory framework doesn't support a change management position when it comes to digital technologies and making investments there.
Well, it's simple, it's utterly false. The reality is, if you actually read the text of the regulation, they're marvelously vague. And they do allow a lot of stretching of what can be done within the boundaries of meeting the requirements. Further, and I think Daniel brought it up, we mentioned was where we're walking through computer software assurances, risk-based approach. And then you'll go, if you look through the regulation and through the preambles of that, there's a lot of mentions of risk-based approach, meaning that you don't have to just do it and throw everything at the wall. You have the ability to look and think critically and do things in a cost-effective manner. However, and this is where it's really important, the key to being within the regulatory frame, which is where a lot of quality folks get scared, is are our folks qualified to do the changes that we need to do? There are training requirements, there's qualification efforts. And so to that end, and I like what Parker said, there's sometimes you can put a degree down and say this person must be a this or that. But bringing just an innately curious mindset and a willingness to pursue can be far more advantageous for the implementation of your system. The key is that you know, all the regulation requires is that you know what you're doing and can show that you do know what you're doing, period. Now, I could say that's very glib for me to say, it's very vague, and there's a lot that goes into that. However, it's not the regulatory burden. The burden is no different than just being able to say, what the heck are you doing? And can you prove it? That's the burden. And if you can meet that, you'll be in good shape.
Right. So with that in mind, you have been part of this collaborative effort with MDIC and have had an opportunity to talk to quite a few companies that have made the commitment to implement the technology or get started on this journey. And so for you and Parker, and I'll start with Parker, when you hear the numbers in terms of the 50% investment in some of the validation work or some of the investment in that budget, what's your reaction? And Daniel, then follow-up question, what's your reaction to that when you hear those numbers like that?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think the attitude that I see, if that's what's happening, is that this is how we've always done it, so this is how we need to keep doing it. And that just doesn't work with advanced technology. You have to rethink about how are you validating, how are you documenting this, right? It's sort of an unknown world in many ways for a lot of different stakeholders within industry. And so you have to give them grace and like bring them on the change journey and educate them. And the best way to do that is to hook them with curiosity. If you can get them to be curious about what you're doing, then it's safer for them to start thinking outside the box. And they don't come to you with like, nope, this is how we have to do this. I need to see all these documents. You need to do a 1,000-page validation and you need an army to do it. And I think that's something that everyone on this journey has to keep in mind. If you are using an army to deploy digital transformation, you are not doing it right. And you have to go back and rethink and challenge yourself. Where am I wasting the most energy and resources? And you have to redesign the systems. Yeah, that might take a little bit up front, but that's where the investment needs to be made, because once it's redesigned, then the technologies can just be implemented with that new framework. I think it also helps when you can bring partners like the MDIC and the FDA to the table that can also help drive internal change as well, right? So, yeah, it's about, again, tapping into the curiosity and breaking down those barriers of thought that we've built up over the years.
So Daniel, from an FDA perspective, and the fact that I talked a little bit about the MDIC programs, and one of the key program areas that we've been fortunate enough to be part of is the Computer Software Assurance Alliance, and you've been a big part of that. Can you talk about some of the conversations over the last several years and how we got to the risk-based framework and how companies can leverage that today?
So that is an element. I'm also going to add in from the CAPA framework, CAPA improvement framework, because both of those are risk-based realizations or risk-based improvement realizations. And both of those come from the same point of view, which is simply, we don't have to do as much as we have told ourselves we need to do in order to satisfy the requirements. The CAPA framework, of course, that led the initiative. That pointed out, and again, this wasn't simple conversations. There were very powerful lawyers with high-powered CEOs that went right to the top and said, I'm doing this because you told us we had to do this, and we simply turned the regulation right back on them and statute and said, tell me where. Simply point to me where. And they couldn't because it wasn't there. And the same exists for computer software assurance, is that in the preamble it says this can be done on a risk basis, this can be done in a risk-based manner. So the idea is straightforward. We write ourselves into corners sometimes procedurally, and we are now held to those procedures that we've written. But and just as a purely human aspect, let's leave the regulation behind, leave all of the elements behind. Our engineers and our leaders and our mid-tier have advanced through time. They've advanced as what has made them successful. And so what's made them successful, they teach to the next generation of folks who then look to make it successful. It is not beyond the pale to realize that experienced managers see the old way of doing things as a guaranteed version of success. However, it was also done under a false assumption. It was done under the assumption that you have to do things to the limit every single time. You asked about how much it costs. The agency doesn't particularly have a foot in for how much it costs, but we can say it's disappointing because obviously every dollar that's done to mitigate compliance or mitigate regulatory burden is a dollar that doesn't get spent to helping a patient, and that in the end is ultimately what we're looking to avoid. Yes, we have requirements. Of course we do. We want to make sure that, our job is to make sure you know what you're doing. But that doesn't mean that you can't be smart about what you document or what, when, and how. That's risk basis, and that permits your approach.
So if I can add
Yeah,
to that real quick. One of the analogies we always use is, we're validating 2024 technology like it's 1999. Because that's when Al Taylor and John Murray wrote that original software validation guidance. Now, even in that guidance, there's still, risk-based approaches, and the amount of effort needs to be commensurate with the risk. There's all that wording in there. But invariably, what we hear when we talk to industry is, yes, but we got written up by FDA. We got a 43 or a warning letter because. And the pushback to Daniel's point is, did you get written up because that's what the predicate rule says? Or did you get written up because that's what your procedure said that you had to do in order to comply with the predicate rule? And I would say on scientific survey, 8 out of 10, maybe higher, the issue is with procedures. And what I use as a litmus test is, if you go to a company and you ask them, what color ink am I supposed to sign documents in your company? And somebody will tell you it's blue or black, and they'll tell you that it's in the regulation. I've read the regulation end to end. I cannot find a color. And what's important is to take into consideration, what can you change? Yes, it's in your SOP, and if it says blue and you sign with black, then you are going to get written up because you violated your SOPs. The same thing applies to validation. Let's modernize our policies and procedures to facilitate the adoption of technology instead of placing blame in other places.
Great, thanks, Dan. So the purpose of the Advanced Manufacturing Clearinghouse is really to help educate, train, and drive awareness. And so, as I mentioned, the collaboration with FDA has been terrific, and Steve Zera represents really the person that has most interacted with a lot of the companies that have applied or approached the portal. And so, Steve, can you give us a little bit of background on some of the technology areas that companies have come to us with, and including digital twin, use of AI, and just kind of give us a brief summary as to what we've seen and where the industry has been interested.
We've seen a great just interaction now with a variety of different technologies, and we've seen a lot coming through with AI, ML, especially since AI has become such a hot topic now. The digital thread and EQMS, that's been a big one in at least the quality realm. Digital twin, when you look at some of the design side of things, the aspects of the total product lifecycle. Additive manufacturing is another one that we've seen a few projects on. So one of the things we're excited is that we've got a good mix right now of projects that we funded between medium, large companies, small and startup companies. And so it gives us a good, I guess, feedback. It's going to give us good feedback when we get the use cases, learnings from these projects, to really see the dynamics that the different type of companies are dealing with, and how have they approached on how to approach the regulatory challenges or any of the technical challenges that they're dealing with. So that's the thing that we're excited about, and I think once those cases get put out here in the next few months and then beyond, I think there's going to be a lot of excitement there, because there's been a lot of interaction and a lot of excitement from the companies who have applied for funding.
Great. So, Daniel, I mean, again, you've been a big part of this promotion and adoption. What do you see sort of going forward? How do we continue to drive adoption and awareness now that we have our 10 programs in place, we have our 10 projects in place? What's some of your vision for the next 12 months as we drive adoption?
One of the things that I've really enjoyed about the process of the clearinghouse has been the people that, and I don't know if this is unique to the medical space or the medical technology space, but it certainly feels that way, is the willingness to do things for the betterment of patients, just simply put. And where companies have stepped forward and said, we're doing something that we think is incredible, and if there's an ability for us to tell our story, we'd like a venue to do that. For anything that involves, we've got 10 stories that are in development, and from those 10 stories, we may get multiple stories out of those. That's wonderful. We also have the ability to look beyond the 10 stories for folks that are willing to come forward and say, I heard a talk, you were talking about advanced clearinghouse. I took this and I really went and made a pitch, and can I just share my story with you? For those that are willing to share the stories, to get out and dispel these myths that it can be, that it's too burdensome, or that it's too documentation heavy, or that it requires too much to be done. Those are the journeys that we could stand forward and say, here were the lessons learned. Here were the benefits gained. Here's ultimately how we were able to help patients. We helped 100,000 patients this year with this change in technology because we were able to make this improvement. Those patient stories are the ones, those helping the general system are what demonstrate the real value. We talk about ROI. We also could talk about ROE. We could talk about the return on equity. If you're investing into something and it's helping patients, that may not necessarily immediately relate to dollars in pockets, but people have been improved. And the agency is chief mission, protect the public health. That's what we're here for. And if we can see that we're very happy to, support that message moving forward.
Great, thank you. So let's talk a little bit. Dan, you mentioned your background and your experience in the industry. So how did you first start your journey on digital transformation?
So I think the important thing when we're talking about advanced technologies, there's always going to be a new advanced technology in a particular area. As I mentioned, 34 years ago, we were implementing robotics and vision systems, and we were implementing computer integrated manufacturing. It's unfortunate that as an industry, we're still calling that advanced manufacturing in some cases. But what's important as you go into digital transformation, as Parker said, is think about it as a journey. You're never going to get there. It's not a destination because technology continuously evolved. And the intent, we call it at Axendia digital sustainability. You should always be looking for tomorrow's technology and seeing how you can implement it today. Very often as an industry, we get stuck on a technology. So currently, the two that jump to mind are cloud. We need to move everything to the cloud. Let's not get stuck in the cloud because the cloud is also going to be obsolete. And the other one is AI, or now generative AI. They're wonderful technologies, but there's something that's going to come after that. So let's look forward and say, how can we leverage those technologies? And they're tools. Let's look at those technologies as tools rather than as solutions. AI isn't going to solve every problem. You don't go to a contractor and say, I have the latest hammer, build me a house with only a hammer, right? It's a tool, and you leave it up to the experts to implement the right solutions. The other point, which is really important, and Parker hit on, is pilots is where projects go to die. Because the pilot has a specific predetermined area that it needs to meet. You have a limited budget. You don't have budget for ongoing, for additional development. Instead, what we recommend is that industry organizations look at use cases where you can get value out of the technology right away, and then you build on that success to roll out the technology across multiple areas. It's really important to reiterate, you're never going to get there. Digital transformation is a journey. And by the way, digital is also going to be obsolete because with quantum computing, at some point, digital technologies are going to be obsolete and we're going to have quantum technologies. So let's keep thinking forward and seeing how we can implement the best available technologies to improve patient outcomes.
Thank you. So Parker, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you're bringing others along with you in that journey. How did you get started and where do you see this going?
Yeah, for sure. So I started in operations and I saw a lot of the challenges and got a lot of scars from just not having the advanced technology that I dreamed of, right? And then I had the opportunity to get a mentor who was incredible and is still incredible. And he just planted that curiosity bug inside of me. He's like, well, what if? And he would just ask me questions and it would drive me crazy because I didn't know how to answer them because they were like really big questions. And I then started doing my own research and my own work on what is advanced manufacturing, what are these technologies? And then I was like all in, right? And I've been all in for a number of years at this point. And so it started with that curiosity. So I'm trying to pass that along, right? I'm trying to get some of these key stakeholders in influential areas of the business, and then also the engineering talents that's coming in curious and hook them with that curiosity bug. And then it really is a catalytic reaction, right? Like over coffee, everyone starts talking about it. And then these projects get dreamed up and these opportunities happen where we just get to allow engineers to be engineers and see what happens. And it's incredible, you know, when you see that magic, and then it's that snowball effect. So that's something that, you know, if you ask anyone who works with me, I'm very passionate about advanced manufacturing, and I try to pass that passion along. And I think it's really, really important. Going off what Dan said, is these are very disruptive technologies and they are going to change our industry. So when we start, like, yes, we need to talk about margins and profitability and all this stuff, but fundamentally, like, if you as a company or whatever your entity is, do not invest in some of these disruptive technologies, you don't need to worry about margins because you're not going to have a product, right? And then you're soon not going to have a company. And I think this is so disruptive in many ways that it's going to allow certain areas to out-innovate others very quickly.
So in the previous panel discussion of the one in Boston, there was a lot of conversation about AI. So I'm going to open it up, and whoever wants to jump in first to talk a little bit about the impact or the influence or the perception that AI is new, it's a tool, or it's a technology. Who wants to go first? And I'll just let whoever wants to go in first go first.
I'm pretty sure I know what he's gonna say. I might say what I'm gonna say, so I don't know. You wanna say it or you
Go
want to
for
say?
it.
Okay. So AI is not new. AI has been around for decades. It's had different names, different titles, different ways of being looked at, but it's ultimately been there for forever, and it will be forever. As the technologies change around it, it is simply more than trying to take a logic mindset and automate it. And now finding, you know, the more complex it gets, the more ingenious it seems, but it's still there. To that end, what we, at least we at the agency for AI, again, I retreat back to, and it's a wonderful thing to work for the agency because I can go with concrete rules that are there, and I can point. Nothing in the regulation says anything against AI. Now, the beautiful thing about our regulation is that it is written so vaguely that it does allow for time and technology to adapt while still maintaining the fundamentals of what we would need to do to prove something. And AI is no different. In fact, the current state of what we're calling it, artificial intelligence, is innovating so rapidly that if we were to attempt to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what AI is, it would be obsolete the moment we touch the first key. And then going at the wonderful pace of government, by the time we actually manage to get a guidance out on it, it would be 2 years back from where it is. That's just a living proof. This is where, at least in our estimation, we hesitate to say anything. However, we also know that industry is full of extraordinarily intelligent people, and that they can lead this effort and keep pace with it, keeping us abreast of what the innovations are so that we can guide, but ultimately allowing industry to take a stand on what should be and what best practices should be and how evolution should take. So that way we're able to, if there is a need where it ultimately hits to something that's either ethically untenable or some dark corner where this could go and shouldn't, that's when we can put our foot down and say, no, that's not where we want it to be. But other than that, and the technology's been around forever.
Yep. And to build on what Daniel mentioned, number one, we're always asked, when is FDA going to come up with regulation on? And the answer is to support what you said. You don't want FDA to come up with regulation on everything, because then it's a challenge. But I think one of the things that the agency's done very well, and actually recently, Troy Tazbaz and John Nickel put forth an AI lifecycle management framework to give industry some suggestions of these are the kinds of things. It's not guidance, it's not regulation, it's here's our thinking. And in talking to Troy in the past, he echoed exactly what Daniel said. By the time we finish writing the guidance, it's going to be obsolete. So I think it's incumbent upon us to look at what is there. NIST actually also has published some standards around risk management for AI. There's plenty of organizations who are looking at, especially in light of generative AI, which is a step function from traditional AI. But it really is important and incumbent upon us as an industry to look at what already exists. And to Daniel's point, are we doing the right things? And can we explain to somebody who comes in and asks us questions on why we did what we did and justify it? That's the bottom line. Don't write yourself into a corner, as you said, with your procedures that are so tight that are very difficult, if not impossible, to follow every single time. And instead look for standard development organizations or government organizations who are working across geographies in order to address some of these issues.